the appeal, the matter pending before the board is seen. So directly provided the copies of the motion and related materials and provide hearing's response to that request. They're prepared to proceed on this evening.
Can you use the microphone?
Yeah.
Can you put it close to that? You can't hear anything you just said, sorry.
What I just said was that there are two matters pending before the board that are requests for protective fee. The first is for the board to consider a motion that would prohibit the admission of material related to protect TT's appeal. A permit that was granted to witness low cuttings and other waste materials after the house. The board has had the opportunity to review the motion and to see the response submitted by council for Hyperion. The medic. Members of the board would make a motion to hear further argument. Motion on make a decision based on the protecting motion to permit materials of fire.
Push deny these requests to permit environmental hearings for materials and evidence.
Second. That all in favor. Is there any discussion, conversation?
I think one of the key things here is that the environmental hearing board decision has not been reached yet, so it's an open night.
if you're having trouble hearing, if you could raise your hand and we'll see what we can do. This isn't the best audio signal on the level, so, just raise your hand and we can clear it up a little bit. I'm doing the best I can. Yeah, there's no lobby.
It's not just yours,
That-
because everybody's speakers.
Well, the mics are for recording purposes primarily. I don't think they're for amplification. So if you gentlemen could speak up when you ask questions, that would be great. Put a Shakespeare projection on.
Okay, I believe we left off last time in exhibit 23, so I have Protect PT exhibit 24 that I'm going to circulate here. And Ms. White,
We have one.
oh, I'm sorry. Yep.
Ma'am, can you raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give here today in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Ms. White, just to be safe, if you could pull the microphone a little closer. A little closer. There you go.
Thank you. Ms. White, I handed you what's marked as exhibit 24. Do you recognize this document?
Yes,
And what is this document?
this is my CV.
And why don't we start with, where did you grow up?
I grew up in a small town. It's called Prospect, Connecticut. It's about in the center of the state.
And when did you move to Pennsylvania?
I moved right outside of Pennsylvania, Ohio in 2013, and then Pittsburgh proper when I went to University of Pittsburgh in 2017
And so you attended the University of Pittsburgh for undergraduate, is that correct?
for graduate school.
Oh, where did you attend the undergraduate? I apologize.
Franciscan University of Steubenville. It's about like 30 minutes outside of Robinson.
And what was your major, your undergraduate major?
Social work.
And you then attended the University of Pittsburgh for graduate school, correct?
Correct.
And did you get a degree from the University of Pittsburgh?
Yes, I got a degree in master's in social work and a master's in public health,
And what year did you get your graduate degrees?
2019.
And so what did you do after you got your graduate degrees from the University of Pittsburgh?
I worked in the nonprofit space, first working with individuals with disabilities in the regulatory side, and then working in mental health residential. And then in 2021, I started working for the Environmental Health Project, focusing on public health impacts from oil and gas drilling.
So going through your CV here, there's a publication noted on next to the last page that discusses integrating public health into ICP projects. What was that publication with regard to?
That was a part of the work I do with Engineers Without Borders. It was regarding how to implement public health qualitative initiatives and data research into sustainability of water distribution and sanitation programs internationally.
And did you present that study as well?
Yes, I did at their national conference,
And when was that?
2019.
And
Engineers Without Borders.
And I also note here that you have certain certificates and licenses. What are those certificates and licenses?
I'm a licensed social worker in Pennsylvania. I also have a master's certified health education specialist, which is a public health certification.
And I noticed that's for the National Commission for Health Education Credentialing. Can you describe what you had to do in order to get that certification?
Yes, you have to have master's in public health. You have to have taken certain community health education courses, and then you have to have about 3,000 hours of field experience after graduation in community health. And then you have to take an exam.
And so you did all that, you took the exam and you successfully completed that program and are currently certified, correct?
Correct.
And moving on to your employment with the Environmental Health Project, which is, I believe on for the board
Page
on
3.
the third page. So can you talk about your employment with the EHP and what that consisted of?
Yes, I was the public health manager, so I oversaw all the public health, community health initiatives, working with communities and organizations like Protect PT, in response to communities' concerns about different oil and gas or pollution that they were concerned with in their communities. So it could include providing data analysis, helping with monitoring, reviewing permits, speaking around policy recommendations, things like that.
And did you regularly interface with government agencies in that position?
Yes, I sat on a board that's called the Health First Table, that advises the state on how to make initiatives health priority.
And what other interactions did you have with the Department of Environmental Protection during your work with EHP?
I was part of a coalition that had quarterly meetings with the Department of Environmental Protection and the Department of Health. And I led those meetings, prepared them, and interacted with all the staff.
And so what topics did those meetings cover in those meetings with the DEP?
Most of it was around the cancer studies that were done at Pitt at the time, which obviously have now completed, but that was a huge component of them. We also talked about upcoming research concerns that we were hearing from communities, things like that.
And so in those meetings, did you communicate community concerns to the DEP on behalf of the communities you served?
Yes.
And what were some of those concerns that you discussed with the DEP at those meetings?
They could vary between health concerns to noise complaints, light complaints, general issues people are having in the community in terms of impacted water or air, things like that.
And have you ever created health impact assessments for communities?
Yes.
And have you ever created a health impact assessment with respect to compressor stations?
Yes.
And could you describe what that impact study entailed?
When I was at the Environmental Health Project, we worked with a community in Medina, Ohio around compressor stations, also out of Dover, New York around compressor station issues. And in my final year there, I redid the entire health assessment procedures that we did. It included looking at what was surrounding a community in terms of other potential emitters, looking at NEI emitters, and then gathering information about baseline information that we may have prior to facilities, any research, and usually eliciting impact statements from residents to gain their information too.
And your CV states that you maintained a research library, wrote literature reviews, and author research summaries for the public. Is that right?
Yes, I wrote what they call featured research reviews, which are available on their website still.
And so could you describe what that process entailed in order to get to the summary piece for the general public?
Yeah, so a lot of research studies are often behind paywalls. So we would take new studies that were being produced, and I would do a summary, kind of high level. We would provide a glossary so people could understand like terms they might not be familiar with, and then kind of highlight all the major parts, methods, discovery, results, and kind of give people the high level takeaway so they didn't have to read the long pages themselves.
So it would be fair to say that you translated these
Correct.
studies into language that lay people can understand.
Correct.
Questions?
Yes.
It also talks here about working with the policy director on position statements and legislative actions, as well as proposed legislation. Is that correct?
Yes.
And could you describe a little bit of that for us?
Yes, I was part of a team that worked with Representative Krajewski out of Philadelphia on the public health fracking bill that got introduced a couple of cycles ago. So we would often provide feedback or education to legislators who had questions about upcoming bills, or just had questions about understanding blue hydrogen or whatever the topic was that they were struggling with.
And so as part of your work, did you regularly review regulations and other laws such as ordinances and statutes with regard to your work?
Yes.
And the last bullet point here talks about lead health data collection efforts and community science programs to understand the impact of shale gas development. Can you talk about that a little bit, please?
Yes, so that was mainly our health impact assessments that we would do in communities. It was just in conjunction with air monitoring that was already going on. So the hope was to get a better full picture understanding beyond just what data or quantitative data can show us.
And I'm also going to ask you about your experience with Engineers Without Borders, Pittsburgh chapter. When did you start with Engineers Without Borders?
As a professional in 2019, as a student in 2017.
And what do you do for the group Engineers Without Borders?
I currently serve as the president, so I oversee our local and international projects, our budget, grant proposals.
What are some of your local projects that Engineers Without Borders is working on?
Our previous local projects have included rebuilding community gardens, rebuilding a playground in the south side was a recent one that we did. So they're usually more structural. The international projects are more water related.
And was there any interaction, or is there any interaction in your work with Engineers Without Borders that also includes a public health component when you design projects?
Yes, the project that we are working on out of the south side still, that's a community, it's an abandoned building. They're refurnishing it into a community center. We've been working with groups like Prevention Point to make sure that there is services offered to the individuals that were using the facility as a homeless shelter and things like that.
And what about the consultant position you had with Engineers Without Borders USA? What projects did you work on in that respect?
I created online training modules for them for people who are, it was a partnership with US Civil Affairs actually. So it was for engineers who are doing water projects abroad on public health perspectives of it in order to make sure the projects are sustainable. So understanding the human side of it, the water sanitation side, and those kind of components.
Great. And what about your work with, as a health survey consultant with the Mountain Watershed Association?
I worked with them on their campaign around the Yukon hazardous waste landfill. We conducted a health survey, so I drafted the survey, received input from the community members, canvassed, administered the survey, compiled the results. It was part of an initiative that the Department of Environmental Protection requested.
And did you, during that project, also have interactions with the Department of Environmental Protection in preparing?
Yes, they asked for the survey as more documented way of showing the issues that the community members were having with the landfill.
And that includes public health.
Correct.
And it says here that you're also a licensed social worker. Is that work that you still do?
Yes, I work as a therapist on the side part-time.
And are you involved at all with any other boards or organizations?
I think all of them have been mentioned at this point.
And what about your work with your community directly, your municipality?
I'm the secretary on Brentwood Borough's Planning Commission.
And what do you do as the secretary of the borough's planning commission?
I take notes, keep roll call, make sure we have minutes to approve at the next meeting, and then, of course, all the duties of any member, reviewing the applications that come before the borough, asking questions.
Great. At this point, I'd like to offer Ms. White as an expert in public health.
Give any report to your
Yes,
misconduct?
yes, I do, thank you. You're not a trained healthcare provider, not a nurse or a doctor,
I'm a social worker. That's a trained healthcare provider.
mental health.
Yeah, I'm a licensed social worker in the state of Pennsylvania.
You're not a trained healthcare provider for physical health.
I feel like I've answered that question. I'm a trained and licensed social worker in the state of Pennsylvania.
You're not a toxicologist, correct?
No, I did not say I was.
You're not an epidemiologist, correct?
Epidemiologists are a subset of public health.
You're
So-
not an epidemiologist.
No, I did not say I was.
You're not an air modeler.
No,
You're not an engineer.
no,
You don't have any expertise in the operation of compressor stations.
no.
Have you ever testified about a compressor station?
Yes.
And when was that and under what circumstances?
This past year for a compressor station proposed in Greene County.
And in front of what body did you testify?
The same body for Greene County. It's a shared municipal body between the counties.
Who asked you to give that testimony?
Center for Co-Field Justice.
And was that testimony in opposition to the compressor station?
It was on the behalf of public health concerns.
Was it, were you testifying in favor of a compressor station or against?
Against.
Have you ever done another report before the report you submitted here today concerning a compressor station?
Yes.
And was that in the same proceeding you've just talked about?
No, I mean, I've done them for the environmental health project in the past.
And what reports have you done on compressor stations in the past for the environmental health project?
Health impact assessments.
What have they been in connection with? What compressor stations and what was the purpose of doing them?
The ones I mentioned previously, Medina, Ohio, and Dover, New York.
And those were based on surveys. You went out into the community and took surveys and then did reports.
They're a mix of surveys and collection of data, such as using maps to figure out what's in proximity, things like that.
Your social worker degree had a concentration in social administration and community organizing, correct?
Correct.
And your public health degree is with a concentration in community and behavioral health sciences.
Correct.
In terms of what the behavioral and community health services concentration is, I have a statement from the website of the Behavioral and Community Health Sciences, and I'd just like to read it to you and you tell me if you agree that this is what that concentration relates to, okay?
I will object as to hearsay.
Well, I think she can, we're involved here like that, so I think we're talking about her qualifications.
It says, we explore social determinants of health to understand the conditions in which health behaviors are produced, as well as to pinpoint the most effective intervention points and methods. Testing these interventions requires engaged community partners and multi-level and frequently mixed methods analyses. Some examples of this work include explorations of the impact of social media on public health issues such as vaccine hesitancy, development of technology-enhanced interventions to reduce health disparities, and collaborative filmmaking as an advocacy tool to build reproductive justice. Do you agree that that is a description of the behavioral and community health sciences concentration?
Mr. Sweeney, I would ask that Ms. White be allowed to read for herself what Ms. Condo just.
That's fair.
Sure, I can give her a copy of it. And you can read as much of it as you like. I was reading from under here that says BCHS applies research on the dynamics of health behavior change to improve health in communities.
And may I also have a copy?
Sure.
Thank you.
Can you just repeat your question?
Sure, my question just is, do you agree, and I'm hoping I don't have to read this all over.
No,
again.
no, you just
Okay.
just the question part.
Yeah, do you agree that the statement I read and that you have in front of you is an accurate description of the concentration of behavioral and community health sciences?
I agree that this is the definition on their application. If it's a question about what the specialty concentration is referring to, I would say to review my transcripts. I think it's a more accurate look at what it is.
Well, do you disagree with the school's reflection here?
I don't disagree. It's just those are giving certain examples of what could be done in BCHS. It's not saying what my experience is specifically.
Well, do you agree that the program learns and applies community engaged strategies, social and behavioral concepts to assess the health status of populations, applied social behavioral theory, social behavioral science research methods to evaluate health promotion programs, and how to communicate with other researchers, communities, and policymakers.
Commissioner Chavez?
I said, I think that's what you just spent 10 minutes telling us.
Well, this was a different description. I was just asking.
I mean, I think it's saying what we talked about, like I'm a certified health education specialist. That's what behavioral and community health sciences focuses on, is how to educate people. So I'm also a little confused. I don't,
Can you get copies as well of what Ms. Cotto just read from?
this also describes what a health impact assessment is, which is a combination of quantitative and qualitative data. Also like to just point out that in order to get a master's in public health, you have to take courses in every aspect of public health, not just your concentration. So you take courses in epidemiology and infectious disease and biostatistics and environmental health.
So as I read your report, and you correct me if your testimony is going to be in this area and it's just not in your report, but I'm not seeing in your report that you're here to testify about a health assessment study around compressor stations that you did. Is that correct?
Can you please restate your question?
Sure. As I read your report, I don't see in there that you are going to testify here tonight based on a health assessment study you have done about that, and you are going to testify about that, and it's just not your report.
No, you're correct. I mean, it wouldn't make sense for me to, because it's a different community, a different area. I can talk about a health assessment in Ohio, but it's not gonna necessarily mean the same thing for here.
In terms of the jobs that you're involved in, I don't believe you mentioned a job with Protect PT. Have you been or are you employed by Protect PT?
Yes, it's on page 1. It's the first one, environmental consultant.
Right, I just meant I don't think we talked about it yet here tonight. So can you tell us what, first of all, are you currently employed by Protect PT?
Yes,
What is your job with them?
I'm the environmental consultant. I help review permit applications or violation records that have come out. I help compile the information for public records to inform people, to educate people, and I help write comments for recommendations, how things can be done to protect public health.
If I understand your testimony, your current jobs consist of the Protect PT job you just described, your private social work therapy with patients, and Engineers Without Borders position. Is that correct?
Engineers Without Borders is volunteer. I don't get paid.
So are there any other paid positions you have right now other than Protect PT and your private social work therapy work?
Well, yes, if you look at my CV, I own my own consulting firm. So all my work I do is contractual.
Is that Public Health Partners LLC?
Yes.
And what work are you currently doing for under Public Health Partners LLC?
Anything that's listed is present. So the environmental consultant, the cancer-free economy network. Those are the 3 right now.
And what are you doing for the first of those 2?
For Protect PT or
No, the first one you listed, that I
Cancer-Free Economy Network.
don't think that's the first one, but what are you doing for Cancer-Free Economy?
The first one I listed was Protect PT. So
Okay, what are you doing for Cancer-Free Economy?
I oversee a grant project.
And what's that grant relate to? Just very general.
It's about building out a portal for environmental groups to be able to find consultants who have similar work alignment.
So at this time, I do not dispute that Ms. White is an expert in community education, in public health policy. But I do dispute that she is an expert in many of the areas that are contained in the report that are very specific to air exposures, risks from air exposures, risks from VOCs, risks from PM 2.5, things that she doesn't have either the educational background or the job experience to address.
Those items that attorney conduct listed, what experience can you offer the board that's to support your ability to render opinions about that?
So as I mentioned, when you receive a public health degree that is certified anywhere from a university in the States, you have to take education classes in all of the areas. So you do take education classes in environmental health, in epidemiology, in biostatistics. So I do feel I have those educational backgrounds, and I have been working in the environmental health space the last couple of years with communities around these issues.
The two projects you talked about in Ohio, I think you told us what gas compressor stations, correct?
Correct.
Did if you felt the need to consult someone to get better informed about that, it might have a specific expertise, you took advantage of those opportunities.
Correct.
So this isn't your first time to come before a panel or some type of agency to talk about the things you discussed in the performance of their statement.
Correct. I've also testified in front of the state legislator.
Anytime you testify.
In front of legislators in policy hearings
So it's policy. So how many times?
twice.
So she's being offered as, just for the board's benefit, her offer is to expertise. Could you just kind of clarify that for us?
Sure. And the one thing that I'll say is her report is fairly straightforward, and she'll only be testifying as to the topics in the report, which do include reviewing modeling and results surrounding air contaminants such as PM 2.5, VOCs, other HAPs. So her reports
Were some of the things you testified to a little bit.
Yes, but her testimony will include the public health component of the, of those, pollutants.
So I guess since we have an issue or objection raised to the scope of their expertise, the board needs to entertain a motion to accept her as an expert in the areas offered by the executive team.
That's a good question.
Sure, absolutely.
You said that you testified in a couple policy hearings. What were the subjects of those hearings?
One was a policy hearing. They were both around fracking and health impacts in general. Both times I was a health expert alongside a researcher to help explain the research in a way that community health perspective cannot be understood.
So your goal was to change the policy with respect to fracking?
Both of those were chances to inform the legislator on like how to draft or legislate policy that protects human health at the same time.
So, the applicants objected to the scope of the expertise proffer that's been made. So the board needs to decide whether to accept it.
I make a motion that we accept Ms. McKenzie, Ms. White's, sorry, testimony. I'll second.
All in favor, aye.
Thank you. Ms. White, I almost called her Miss McKenzie now. I'm gonna hand you what's marked as, Protect PT Exhibit 25.
Great, one second. And, little blind or anything like that. Beaming with the sun.
Slide that map over. There's no block.
Yeah, that would get really warm there. That's better. Yeah, better.
Yeah, thank you.
Just for the record, Protect PT Exhibit 4 is this one, CD, Protect PT Exhibit 25 is report she prepared. And that has been given to opposing counsel.
And just so I don't forget, I would move, Protect PT Exhibit 24 into evidence.
Objection.
No objection.
Ms. White, do you recognize, this document?
Yes,
And what is this document?
this is the report I prepared.
This is the report you prepared, specifically for this year?
Yes, sorry.
No, you're fine. And when did you prepare this report?
Back in February.
And going to the first page of your report, the background on the Guardian Compressor Station, what did you do to prepare for tonight's testimony with respect to specific research surrounding the proposed site?
This included reviewing all permit applications, any attachments, amendments, anything like that, as well as looking at the map on PADP site to understand like other facilities that are nearby, schools, anything else that's in proximity.
And your first topic here talks about compressor station emissions. I'm going to go. This is marked as Protect PT Exhibit 26. This is something that the board has seen before. It's the breakout of the air report from Hyperion's application. So you don't have to flip through all of the entire application. Ms. White, do you recognize this document?
Yes,
And what is this document?
it is part of the application, or is included in the application and the information that I reviewed originally.
And would you agree that this is the air quality study?
Yes,
And if we go to I believe it's page 8 of the report. Did you review this table?
yes, I did.
And what does this table reflect?
This is showing estimated emissions that are allowed within the permit. It's breaking them down by different pollutants, and it breaks it out by the emission units or where they're being emitted from. Since Aphrodite well pad is nearby, it also includes Aphrodite.
Are you aware of the Poseidon well site that is also on this property?
Yes,
And does this include the emissions from the Poseidon well site?
it does not.
And with respect to the potential to emit summary, does this also include any limitations on the emissions? Want me to read?
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. Did you happen to notice whether or not there are limits on the amount of these pollutants that can be emitted from the compressor station?
I do not think it specifies, no.
And what are the types of pollutants are listed at the top of this page here, starting with NOx?
Nitrogen, carbon monoxide. This groups volatile organic compounds together, which is a class. Also includes particulate matter, the largest single HAP or hazardous air pollutant, which if you look at the page 10, it's formaldehyde. The total amount of hazardous air pollutants, so on.
And I just want to confirm that the largest HAP is formaldehyde. Is that what you just specified too?
Yes, if you look on page 10 under the exemption 38C criteria line, it's A, said formaldehyde is the largest single HAP.
So in looking at this emission summary, does this summary give specific information as to which pollutant is being emitted?
This is giving information about the amount of pollutions emitted to be released within a year based on tons per year.
But what about specific pollutants such as benzene, toluene?
No, because those are all volatile organic compounds.
So those you assume are being grouped into the VOC column, is that correct?
I would have to assume.
And moving on to page 12. What is that table on page 12?
This is a table that's looking at potential chemicals that could be used on the facility, specifically with regards to like produced water and what might be in that produced water.
And we'll come back to this report after we discuss yours, but I just wanted to give an overview of what this air report study contains. If you move on to page 15.
That's the question at this point.
Sure.
That's why I gotta write this down. Can you tell me what the potential for the bed means?
Do you mean,
Title of table 1, it says gardens of potential to the mill.
what page are you on? Sorry.
The title of the table.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, thank you. So this chart, it's showing you what is potentially going to be emitted from this facility. So if you look in the emission units category on the left-hand side, it's breaking it down by the parts of the facility. So like the compressor versus the dehydrator. So it's showing you in tons per year what they're estimating would be released for each of these chemicals. And then
Let me lay a foundation here. So if the emission units on the side, what is listed on the emission unit in that column? You can read the first few. Starting with compressor 1.
oh, sorry,
No, you're fine. Yeah,
you're
right
talking
here.
to me.
Yeah.
So you want me to read?
No, I wasn't asking him to read. Yeah.
Sorry.
You can read which of the units are listed. Just the first 3. What are those?
The numbers like the 10.86. So
Compressor 1.
compressor 1,
2,
compressor 2, compressor 3.
And then moving down, do you see the generator 1 and generator 2?
Yes,
And then you mentioned glycol dehydrator. That's listed here as well.
correct.
So the potential to emit emission summary is broken down by the emission units on the left, correct?
Correct.
So this is identifying that the compressor, 6 of them are proposed, that each compressor unit will have this potential to emit these chemicals, correct?
Correct.
And then the glycol dehydrator, number 1, that has a different potential to emit, correct?
Correct.
But you have to define.
Well, right, it says the potential air emissions from the operation of the project are identified in table 1 below. I can have Ms. White read.
No,
That's not this question. The question was, tell me what potential it means to you.
Right.
Like what it means to me.
What on this table, what does potential to emit mean?
To me, I look at that as to indicate what could potentially be or what might be emitted from this facility, broken down by the parts of the facility.
Is that the operating emissions, or is it some other number?
I'm not sure I follow.
Well, I think there's confusion over what potential filling means.
I'm not sure I'm like the best to answer this question because I'm not the one like that requires the charts be made this way. I think Ms. Johnson's bringing it up in order to talk about health impacts.
So I think that the potential to emit is fairly straightforward. Is there any other questions that the board might have to help clarify what potential means?
There is a definition of what potential filling is.
And what is that?
Well, it's what level of pollutant would be emitted if the unit operated 24/7 every day of the year.
Okay.
So most units don't operate every day of the year, every hour. So when you look at, standard set, they want to see what the potential is, but that isn't necessarily what gets emitted.
We follow, and her report actually breaks down operational emissions, blow down emissions, and the different types of emissions that will come from the facility. So when we get to that part of her report, hopefully that'll clear things up.
All right, thank you.
Sure. So I think we left off on page 15. And I just want to wrap that up. Would you agree that this is the Guardian Compressor Station potential spill impacts?
Yes,
And on the left-hand side, what are those potential spills that are listed?
it's looking at it versus produced water, similar to the previous chart. Methanol, things that could be coming from the engine coolant, oil, et cetera.
And what, do you see the sentence directly under the chart?
Yes,
And what does that say?
no associated health impacts to offsite receptors are anticipated for this project since the predicted maximum concentrations are below the health benchmarks.
Okay, and we'll come back to that. Now, moving back over to your report. The next section, you've discussed compressor station emissions after we talked about the background. So what does your report state about the different emissions that may come from the compressor station?
A majority of the emissions happen during the operational period, which is once it's up and operating. And those are usually broken down it is broken down by researchers into 3 categories. Fugitive emissions, which is things that come from usually equipment failures or breaking down over time, blowdowns, and then accidents. And blowdowns are the single highest emitter at compressor station.
So with respect to, you just mentioned the operational emissions, and let's spend a little time on each bullet point that you have in your report. And could you, describe the fugitive emissions a little more detailed?
Yes, so fugitive emissions are things that come when things are uncontrolled or under controlled. Mostly they come from equipment leaks over time. There was a study that was done on a compressor station out of Texas that tracked the fugitive emission leaks over a 4-month period, and they broke it down based on which specific parts were having the issue. But essentially, that's where the fugitive emissions come from. The blowdowns can be scheduled or they can happen without planned notice. They're the largest emitter, as I said. This is when there's a rush of natural gas and it rushes through the blowdown valve. There will be like a gas plume in the air. Sometimes people see them if they're driving around. They tend to be the most forceful at the beginning, which it can be like 30 to 60 minutes, but they can last for several hours.
And you mentioned accidents that could occur at a compressor station, correct?
Yes, I don't get too much into those in my report because I believe there's someone else to speak to those, but those would include like fire, explosions, bigger issues that also put the workers at risk as well as first responders.
And moving on to the next page, the second page, there's a section here about how emissions are monitored. Can you discuss what you opined on with respect to the monitoring of air emissions?
Yes, so if you look back at the charts previously in the air quality study, you'll notice that the unit they use,
And which one are you on? I'm sorry. page
Yeah.
8 or?
yes, page 8, sorry.
Nothing fun.
They measure the pollutant in tons per year. This is done on purpose. It is considered the best practice for industry and in the environmental field. It helps you to understand the quality of air in a region over a long period of time. However, it's not necessarily how you would measure it for impact for health, because it's looking at a long period of time. So when you put that out over a course of a time, you lose like peaks. So blowdowns, for example, are a peak of emissions at one point. And whenever you average things out, you lose the highs and the lows. And when you're an individual living in the community, you experience all of it, not just the average out over the year. I don't know if we have that chart, if people want an example.
Yes, I have that. Are you talking about the study that EHP did?
Yeah, it's data from the Department of Environmental Protection for another. But yes, it's that
I'm
one.
gonna save that. We'll get to
Okay.
that. And I just want to make it through a couple more questions on this point. So with respect to the chart that's on page 8 of the report, is it your testimony that during periods of blowdowns or other accidents, the emissions could be much more than what's listed on this chart?
Yes.
Second, this is what you emit in a year.
Well, so over the course of a year, on average, you have 10. Some days might be 20, some days might be 60, some days might be 0.
Not the potential. You're talking about two different things. You're talking about concentration. So the concentration that's emitted can change. Okay, go up and down. I don't think that's the question that you asked. You ask if this table relates to those concentrations, and the answer is, I don't think so.
This table relates because it's showing you what you would receive, the information about a compressor station that's active. When they measure the emissions, it's always done in tons per year, but that's not an accurate picture of how people on the ground are impacted, is what I'm trying to explain.
So the next section here that you, in your report, you talk about the phases of construction and operations. And there's a section in there that talks about resident living near a compressor station and those concerns. Can you describe that?
Yes, so most research that has collected information from residents living near compressor stations, the reports are similar. Things like irritation and breathing, runny nose, itchy eyes, itchy throat. And those are congruent when you look at the kind of emissions that they are to release. It depends on the study, but most studies look within a half mile of the facility.
So now I'll give you this exhibit, which has some of those distances. I marked this as Protect PT Exhibit 27.
Most scientific studies will look at half a mile and then a mile from the facility to measure.
This exhibit 27 is document titled Southwest Petroleum Environmental Health Project, Summer Compressor Station, and Health Impacts, February 24, 2000.
And Ms. White, is this report cited in your written report that you prepared for this evening?
Yes,
And would you agree that that report is cited to under potential health impacts?
yes.
So let's start generally.
I'm sorry, before we get into substantive questioning about Exhibit 27, I would object to the admissibility of Exhibit 27 and therefore specific questioning around its content. It's not published. And in fact, there's no author of it that even shows up here, other than it apparently was something put together by one or group of people at the Environmental Health Project. As I understand this witness's job history, she didn't start at EHP till years after 2015. So by definition, she could not have been involved in it. So I think that for her to now testify about it is an improper hearsay. It's not a published article.
Well, I think she's being offered as an expert on the impacts of unconventional gas drilling. They've not appreciated that. She start various studies, and studies are going to be position challenging or supported. So you'll certainly have the opportunity in a cross-examination to attack the rescue before.
Yeah, I appreciate your ruling. I just believe that it appears that we're going to be reading from it. I think that's different than her having independent opinions and relying on it. But I understand and I'll cross examine.
So it's that sort of just lay the foundation appropriately. She's saying based on I use this report in support of this. Not what the report says itself, because that's what she did.
Correct.
Okay, so beginning in your report, potential health impacts, this was one of the studies that you used to write this opinion, correct?
Correct, because this report is literature review of already existing studies.
And that pertains to specifically compressor stations, correct?
Correct.
Now, the potential health impacts from compressor stations, as you described them in your report, what are some of those potential health impacts?
So in my report, I talk about two different types of potential health impacts, two categories. The first being the volatile organic compounds, which you can see on the potential, I'm forgetting the name of it, potential to emit chart as it lists volatile organic compounds. And then the second is particulate matter, which is also listed. Volatile organic compounds, while they're a class, so there's many different types like benzene, toluene, formaldehyde. So they can vary, but generally speaking, they have similar symptoms in short term of things I mentioned, the irritation with breathing, difficulty breathing, asthma exacerbations, nose irritation, headaches, dizziness, fatigue. And then in long term, depending on which ones we're talking about, they can have impacts on the liver, the kidneys, and some such as benzene and formaldehyde are known to cause cancer.
And with respect to the ordinance and the application materials, did you find any limitations on the amount of VOCs that the compressor station would be permitted to emit?
I did not.
And what about for formaldehyde?
I did not. Formaldehyde is the largest, compressor stations have been shown in research to be the largest emitter of formaldehyde.
And moving on to the next page of your report, and this had come up with respect to other health conditions that can result. What are some other health conditions that can result as part of exposure to these emissions?
When we talk about particulate matter specifically, there's been numerous studies showing the impact in terms of our cardiovascular system. A couple of them that I've listed there. Specifically, we're looking at people who are exposed to higher particulate matter, PM 2.5 specifically, and its increase on cardiopulmonary morbidity and mortality. So essentially things like heart disease that could lead to cardiac arrest or things like that later on. There have also been several studies that I listed here that looked at specifically just increased heart rate, which of course over time can lead to heart disease and those things as well.
And here on this section, we talk about you talk about the toxicity of the chemical and determined by the concentration. What do you mean by that with respect to the health impacts?
Yeah, so that's what I was trying to get at earlier about the tons per year versus what someone's really exposed to in blowdowns. Everyone's response is going to be dependent on how much they're actually exposed to, which, is dependent on the intensity of the exposure and then also the duration. Sometimes if it's really intense, even if it's short, our bodies can have an immediate reaction. That's where you see in research community members reporting immediate burning eyes, burning nose, things like that, versus more longer term exposure where you might not feel anything immediately, but it leads to these longer term issues of heart disease or kidney issues.
And in connection with your research and your work, have you spoken directly to people who have had these complaints, who live next to compressor stations?
Objection, hearsay.
I think it's 400% given. So. it's part of the process.
So I'll repeat the question. Have you, in part of your studies and your work, spoken with people who've been exposed to emissions from compressor stations?
Yes.
And what are some of the health effects that they've reported to you?
Like I mentioned, the immediate ones that most people notice are the irritation of like the eyes, the nose, difficulty breathing. Kids with asthma tend to notice it getting worse. Sometimes the fatigue, headaches, dizziness, if they have that prolonged exposure and usually stay outside as opposed to trying to go inside.
And you mentioned asthma, and you had mentioned before the University of Pittsburgh Health Studies, correct?
Yes,
And are you familiar with the University of Pittsburgh Health Study on asthma outcomes?
yes,
And would you agree that emissions from compressor stations could contribute to worsening of asthma outcomes?
yes. For any increased exposure to PM 2.5 is directly known, whatever it's coming from will increase asthma because the smaller the particulate matter is, the deeper in our lungs it gets to. So it's going to cause people who already have asthma or breathing issues to have more difficulty, which research has shown leads to more asthma exacerbations, hospitalizations, things like that.
And would you describe asthma as a mild disease or something that could be significant?
Objection, I don't believe that. She's an expert.
I'll withdraw the question.
She objected.
He sustained, I withdrew.
Said it's not in her.
And Ms. White, what about repeated exposures?
So again, this goes back to the toxicity, right? When people are exposed over time, it just compounds health impacts. So even when we talk about exposure limits, something can come in under an allowed exposure limit, but if someone is continually exposed to it over and over again, that builds up in the body. If we're talking about kids have a harder time processing toxins. It takes longer for a kid's body to process it. So for kids or people with chronic health issues, it can take even longer to process those.
And if I may, with respect to the charts and distances, and we can refer to this particular study that we have in Exhibit 27, so Ms. White can finish her answer on that line of questioning. And it's on page.
The table 1, is that what you mean?
What page are you on?
2. This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's at the top of 2.
And
Are we in Exhibit 27?
yes.
Yes.
And Ms. White, can you describe what the table is at the top of page 2?
This table was data that was pulled from the Pennsylvania Department of Health for a compressor station in Hickory, Pennsylvania. This is what I was talking about earlier, about when you look at tons per year, or just you average out the emissions over time, you lose the peaks. So this was just looking at 3 specific, but if you look at ethyl benzene, for example, it's hard to read, but on May 18th, there was no detect in the morning and evening. For May 19th, it was 964, and then 2,000, and then May 20th, 10,000 and 27,000. So this just illustrates what I was trying to say of that once you average that out, it's only showing at 6,000. But if you live in the community, you experienced it every day at those variations. So once you average things out, you lose the range.
Thank you. Now, I just want to ask, this was collected by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, not Health, correct?
Correct. This is based on like facility reported information.
And going down to the bottom of that page, the emissions that are listed there, the specific chemicals, and this goes back to the line of questioning about what's missing in the application. Are these chemicals that are listed, were they reported by the DEP with respect to compressor station emissions?
Sorry, you mean in this report
Yeah.
where the,
Yeah.
Yes, these were ones that facilities reported.
And that was from the Department of Environmental Protection.
Correct.
Now I'm gonna go to,
The two references to the DEP,
Mhm.
did you go to those DEP reports and verify?
Yeah, they're just public source information.
and let's go to page 9 of that report. And you had testified that formaldehyde is the largest source of hazardous air pollutants. Does this report also discuss formaldehyde?
Yes, it does.
And what does it say about exposure to formaldehyde?
It says that, I don't know which paragraph.
Would you agree
or-
that this report matches your prior testimony about exposures to VOCs?
Correct. And I would also add that since this coming out, there's been more and more research done on formaldehyde and health impacts that attest to this as well.
And wrapping this up, let's go to page 14. And there's an article that's listed. Did you review that article with respect to the proximity of living next to compressor stations?
Yes.
And what is your understanding of the severity of health impacts with respect to proximity to a compressor station?
Object to the form of the question. I don't know if she's now asking her what this study that she just referenced
And I asked what her understanding
of the study, or just because you prefaced it by asking her if she reviewed the study.
How about within the board, your opinion based on the research and review and preparation of the report of the state of health impacts of formaldehyde that's produced by compressor stations. To follow that and resolve trend.
Yeah. So this study looked at the difference in the reported symptoms based on the proximity to the facility. So if you look at it, it states that when they were 1,500 to 4,000 feet away, that 27% of the participants reported the throat irritation I mentioned earlier, and that increased to 63% when they were 500 to 1,500 feet.
And you had mentioned before the studies and reports that you've done on health impacts. Does this match what this study says here?
Yes, I mean, when we talk about toxicity, the closer you are to something, that's going to prolong your exposure.
And as far as sensitive receptors are concerned, what is your understanding and your opinion with respect to children who are exposed to these emissions?
As I mentioned before, there's a couple of reasons children tend to have more severe impacts. One being that it takes longer for them to get toxins out of their body. The second being children have a higher breathing rate, so they breathe in more air than an adult would at the same time. So if they're both standing outside next to each other, children just breathe in more air. This also kind of goes hand in hand with kids tend to be outside more, and they're also usually exercising a lot outside. When we exercise, we breathe more rapidly. And then of course, kids and fetuses as well are still developing. So there's more long-term impacts for their brain development.
And you had mentioned the University of Pittsburgh Health Studies. Did that include a study about increased cancer rates in children?
Yes.
And did your review of those studies reveal that exposure to air emissions was partly responsible for that increase in cancer?
Yes, they were looking at air exposure.
And you said you had looked at maps and you had researched the location of the proposed compressor station. Do you know about how many schools are in the area?
6 of the 8 schools in this school district are in this area, which according to the school's website is 3,000 kids.
And about,
Objection, what is this area?
well, I was just gonna ask for that. And how far away are these schools from the proposed location?
All within 5 miles.
Within 5 miles.
Well, it's about 5,208.
Right, so I looked for that specifically for the schools. I looked at anything that was within a 5-mile radius.
Study stating distance 1,500 or 1,000.
We can provide a breakdown of the locations of the schools.
Oh, I
that
know
would be
exactly.
within.
Yes, I mean, this specific study was looking at those. I mean, that's just one study. Different studies break it down differently, but usually I was generalizing all the schools are within 5 miles. Obviously, there's a breakdown of the ones that are like 2 versus 4, various differences.
And are you aware of whether or not there are residences in proximity to the proposed compressor station?
Yes,
And going,
How many? Resides and what?
I don't recall them a number off the top of my head.
we can get that information. Any other questions before we move on?
Yes. That's right. Are you aware of any other compressor stations located in Westmoreland County?
Not right the second off the top of my head.
So you're not aware of any health impact associated with any other compressor station?
I mean, like I mentioned, I was at one recently that was in Greene County. And I've done ones in Washington County.
So moving on to the conclusion of your report, and you discussed aggregate emissions monitoring. What do you mean by that?
This is a little bit what we were talking about before when you look at the potential to emit chart. They do on page 2 include the Aphrodite well pad, but generally speaking, our permits have minimal requirements in terms of how many, the distance of how far they have to look. So aggregate air emissions is the idea of including a wider understanding of what's going on in the environment, because you can say like this facility is only going to emit this much, but if someone's also living near a couple of small things that emit, obviously for an individual's health, all of those things compound. So aggregate emissions is the idea of like combining more of those so we understand what the potential air quality actually is. And I believe in my report, I also included the Pennsylvania grand jury report by our current governor wrote recommending that we switch to aggregate air emissions and include a larger geographical area.
And in the application, you said you did not notice that Poseidon well site was included. Did you see any air modeling or testing with respect to the Valley landfill?
No, I did not.
I just need one more minute. I might be wrapping up. So, Ms. White, is it your opinion that the proposed Guardian compressor station emissions from the compressor station during the different phases would have a negative impact on the health of residents surrounding the compressor station?
Yes,
And is that to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
yes.
Thank you.
That question. The activities you talked about, fugitive emissions. Things. Would you agree that these are part and parcel of standard operations of compressor station?
Yes,
That's what happens on a daily, weekly, monthly basis at a compressor station.
yes. My hope is that what I've shared tonight just shows that some of these standard operating procedures aren't necessarily built from a health perspective.
One of your jobs based on your CV for Protect PT, who you're working for now, is to serve as an expert witness in proceedings like this, correct?
Correct.
You have previously run recently for office for the Pennsylvania Senate on a progressive platform that included transitioning to green energy, correct?
Objection relevant?
Was.
I understand you're trying to show bias or not leaning one way or the other. I think the board's aware at this point, after doing unconventional gas special exception applications since probably 2016, that witnesses, some are paid by Purian or Olympus or Apex, and some witnesses are paid by PT on behalf of Protect PT in some fashion. So I think the board's aware of the potential for bias, so the board takes that into consideration. So if we could get to the notes.
Sure. With respect to your report, did you do any independent research that's cited in your footnotes other than reviewing and taking sentences and footnotes from the 2015 EHP report that's been marked as Exhibit 27?
I did not do any independent research. I'm not a researcher.
And you would agree with me, would you not, that all of your footnotes, your citations in your report here are taken from the 2015 Environmental Health Project summary, which has been marked as Exhibit 27?
No, not necessarily.
Can you show me any citations in your report that aren't taken from the 2015 summary?
Objection is to relevant.
I think it is relevant. The thrust of the question is if her study is based on an environmental community organization's compilation she definitely source, then the board needs to be aware. She's going to tell us that there are other sources independent of the study that she's already told us that she went into the footnotes and verified the information before she used it as a basis for her report.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. I just want to note that the footnotes themselves have dates and some of them post-date the EHP report, so.
Or can we take note?
On page 4, I guess, 4. Citation 7, citation 9, citation 10, as well as the first paragraph on that page have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different citations for different independent research studies.
So you have the University of Pittsburgh studies that are cited here and didn't exist back in 2015, correct?
Correct.
And we can get into more detail about this, but those studies didn't relate to compressor stations, correct? The pit studies.
Correct.
And then you have some citations generally about health effects of PM 2.5, but not in the context of oil and gas exposures, let alone compressor stations, correct?
No, I would disagree with that.
Well, what citation do you have that relates to PM 2.5 exposure from compressor stations?
Citation 10.
Well, that's citation 10 is the University of Pittsburgh study. correct? Footnote 10?
Footnote 10, ischemic heart disease events triggered by short-term exposure to fine particulate air pollution.
My footnote 10, you looking at your report? My footnote 10 says University of Pittsburgh School of Public Health, hydraulic fracturing. Is there a different version of your report?
I don't know then.
What report do you have? I have her report that you submitted to the board and to us by email.
I handed you the final report. But
Oh, are you saying that the one you submitted to me and the board isn't the same as what you marked here?
no, it was the same. I'm not sure what version you're referring to. Is yours dated February 8th, 2024?
March 28th, 2024.
No, we're looking at the February 8th, 2024.
Well, how many versions of the report are there?
The only one that's submitted to the board is the one. It's not enough.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons.
Well, this one was submitted by email. So we're gonna disregard that one, I guess, and I don't know if the board has it or not already. Because it was
No,
submitted.
the one did not get that.
Yes, we did.
We did. Okay.
So can I move that we discard, well, the better word, I guess, the one that preceded this one? Which is the one I was certainly working with before tonight, because it was what was submitted.
Do you want me to explain the difference? Because there's only one difference in them.
Yes, please, if you could indulge Ms. McKenzie to explain the difference between the two reports.
The only difference in that one is it includes the University of Pittsburgh research studies, which some people have asked us not to include because it's not peer reviewed yet. So we removed it from the final report. The rest of the studies that are included here are peer reviewed.
Correct. We should report to out with a reference to PIP. Needed in preparation for tonight, but some other potential time. We went through and based on the experience. These references. PIP citation was not a valid citation, not a perfect citation. Doesn't have.
Correct. It was just released from the department and the state. So
So I would then move to strike the testimony that she's already given tonight about the PIT study. She gave testimony in response to council's questions on the PIT study. So if she's not offering that, I think we need to strike it, and then I won't cross-examine her.
I think the board can give the weight to that study based on that. We had a fair amount of thinking about the study a couple months ago.
And they've
So,
been entered into evidence.
and it can be given whatever weight appropriate. So it's not as strong as a peer review published study that would have that kind of weight, and the board can consider that as its approach.
I'll then cross-examine her on what she testified to on that. Okay, so now that we have the report that was offered into evidence, you're referring to footnote 10, which is the Pope article.
correct.
The Pope article, though, was not dealing with PM 2.5 exposures from compressor stations, correct?
I don't have the full study in front of me. The health impacts from particulate matter are the same. It doesn't matter what the emitter is.
Well, are you familiar with the toxicologic concept of dose response?
Yes,
And that means that you can be exposed to a substance that at a certain level would be toxic, but at another lesser level is not toxic, correct?
it depends on the substance.
But dose response.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us what you understand from your coursework dose response to be?
Yes, I agree with your assessment. I'm just saying for the example of benzene, the acceptable amount to be exposed to benzene is 0.
Well, how about
So-
PM 2.5, which is what we're talking about now? You would agree that we're all being exposed to PM 2.5 right now, correct?
Correct.
If I fry bacon or light a candle in my home, I'm exposed to high degree of PM 2.5. You would agree with that?
Correct.
So the dose, the amount of the exposure to PM 2.5 makes a difference.
Yes.
what information do you have about the specific equipment and operation that's going to occur at the Guardian compressor station we're here about tonight versus compressor stations in general?
I mean, for this facility, I relied on the application information and what it talks about in there.
Did you compare that equipment and that operation to any of the compressor stations? For instance, the compressor station, the Stewart and Energy Corp compressor stations that you've testified about on page 2 of the 2015 EHP report.
You're asking if I compared,
You compared the equipment and the operations for this compressor station we're here about tonight with the equipment and the operations back in 2010 of the Stewart and Energy Corp compressor stations.
no, I mean, I think we've established I'm not an engineer, so.
And you would agree with me, would you not, that the information about the emissions from the Stewart and the Energy Corp compressor stations based on the footnote in the 2015 report were from an emissions inventory that they provided to DEP, correct?
Object to form.
I mean, I think I already stated that the information was provided by the facilities for the emissions.
As part of an emissions inventory.
Correct.
Not as a part of monitoring.
I mean, I don't work for the Department of Environmental Protection. I don't know how they break down where the information comes from.
Do you understand how emissions inventories are submitted?
Yes,
How do you understand emissions inventories are submitted by producers?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Are you familiar with annual emissions inventories that are submitted to the PADEP?
Yes,
Jack
Yeah.
is relevant. She's here testifying about public health, not engineering scope and
No, but
data
she
entry.
did offer opinion as to the staff to its benefit is that the CPC there about it. So if I understand correctly, you're asking her to explain what the issue
Correct.
that's prepared by a period on what those actual gas, like an actual gas producer.
Correct. Do you
Fac-
understand how they're
yes,
together?
facilities have to submit certain reports that show their annual emissions. It's tons per year.
And do you know if that's done through monitoring or through calculations like Ms. Blinn did?
I'm not familiar with the specifics of how they calculate it.
Are you aware of the regulatory requirements for air permitting, both from DEP and EPA for this Guardian compressor station?
Yes,
And what is your understanding of that?
you mean in terms of like requirements or what was submitted in the application?
Correct, the requirements. What are the regulatory requirements for air permitting for the Guardian compressor station?
I would object again as to her testimony being on health impacts, not what the regulations state.
She testified about aggregate emissions not being the appropriate way to do things.
But I did also state that that is the required way. I was just suggesting that when we talk about it in terms of health, it's not the full picture. Can you restate the question?
Sure, the question is simply, do you understand what air permitting requirements are in place with respect to the Guardian compressor station?
Yes, based on reviewing the application.
And what are those?
I mean, we went over some of them in the potential to emit emission summary.
Well, is that the extent of your knowledge, what you saw in Ms. Blinn's table?
I'm not really sure I understand the question that you're asking me.
Did you review Ms. Blinn's testimony?
Yes,
And do you have an understanding from your review of that testimony, the different permits and the different permitting requirements that she testified to both with respect to EPA and DEP, that the Guardian Compressor Station is required to submit.
Yes.
And I'm just asking you, what is that understanding?
So you want me to like walk through the permit requirements?
If you know them.
I don't really understand what this has to do with my testimony. I'm not an air permit.
Even with all state mandated permitting, guidelines, requirements, reporting, there are still public health concerns. For instance, we should be doing aggregate monitoring, which means.
Correct.
Their assessment of it.
Correct.
So I think the board understands what you guys correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is the current position is we've done all that's required of us, either for the ordinance from the township or for DEP or whatever other agency.
Correct.
So I think we have to just this, if we could move on to something.
Sure. You testified about table 1 in the 2015 Environmental Health Project summary. And I believe you indicated that you had gone back into the underlying source document before you did your report and came here tonight to look at those numbers.
That's
Did I
correct.
understand that correctly? Can you tell us, based on your review of the report or your memory, and the footnotes in the report, what that document was that you went into to confirm those numbers?
It's the submission data from I believe it's the Hickory, the Hickory compressor station. I mean, this table is just an example of one facility's reported emissions broken down.
Where in the references in the back of the summary is the reference listed for that table 1 that you would have gone to look it up?
I don't understand your question. I didn't author this document, so I didn't write the citations.
I think she, in an answer to my question, that she went, when she saw tables 1 and other references, she said that she would.
And
That's correct.
I'm just trying to understand how she knew where to go and where she went. I mean, there's nothing about table 1 on its face that would give you any information about where to go to confirm that. And I'm asking her, was there a footnote or something in the references that allows?
It's citation number 2 before the chart. Marcellus Shale Short-Term Ambient Air Sampling Report, Pennsylvania Department of Environmental
So
Protection.
you went to that short-term report.
That's correct.
Are you familiar with the findings of the PADEP short-term report that they found no health effects from no exceedances of health-based standards from their short-term modeling, or I'm sorry, the short-term monitoring?
Yes, but I wasn't referring to the findings. I'm using this chart as an example to show the peaks in emissions.
You talked about construction, fugitive emissions from construction activities at compressor stations. Is that correct?
Fugitive emissions during operation, not during construction. Construction is separate.
Well, in your report, you talk about compressor station emissions fall into 2 categories: construction emissions and operational emissions.
Yes.
Are you now saying that you're not testifying about construction emissions?
No, I am, but fugitive emissions are considered a part of operational emissions. Construction emissions are like when it's being built, the diesel trucks,
Right, and I'm
which are short term, which is why I didn't really discuss them in my report.
and is that something that you are testifying to the board that is a health concern or not?
It is, it's in my report. I just spent more time talking about operational because in the lifelong operation of a compressor station, a majority of it's going to be in the operational phase, not construction.
What are the construction emissions that you're concerned about?
So construction emissions, usually the highest is PM 2.5. That can be increased because of increased truck traffic. Diesel trucks obviously contribute to PM 2.5. That's usually the major one of concern for construction.
And what would be the necessary construction activities for a compressor station? Not talking about a well pad now or fracking, but for a compressor station, what would be the construction activities that you'd be concerned about creating these PM 2.5 emissions?
I mean, I think I just said the biggest one is truck traffic.
And do you have any information about how many trucks would be required to come onto the site in order to construct, to prepare the area for the compressor station and construct the compressor station?
No, because I'm not an engineer.
You also testified about operational fugitive emissions, correct?
Correct.
In your report, you list those as being from equipment leaks and from evaporative sources. What are the equipment leaks that you're referencing there?
I mean, they could be a whole host of things. Anytime any kind of equipment fails on any kind of facility, it can cause leaks.
And how about the evaporative sources? What are the evaporative sources that you're referring there?
That would be whenever things are released and it can evaporate into the air. So if there's spills, like the one chart talks about spill potential. So if things are spilled and it becomes gas.
Did you look at Ms. Blynn's modeling with respect to the potential evaporative sources of emissions from spills?
Yes.
And did you do your own analysis to critique that or to determine that it wasn't valid?
No.
In your report, you reference a Eastern Research Group and Sage Environmental Consulting 2011 report. You recall that?
Yes.
Did you read that report?
Yes.
About how thick is it?
I think it's 321 pages.
And did you read all 321 pages before you did your report and came here to testify?
Yes, I did.
Mr. Chairman, I would object to ask the comment and move it on Ms. White.
And you would agree with me, would you not, that this study was done in Fort Worth
That's correct.
back in 2011?
That's correct.
I have the entire report here, and you can certainly look at any part of it you'd like. I'm going to address your attention to one in particular.
Ms. Connor, we have a copy of that.
Yep, I'm getting it. And I'm up to P.
Yes.
Okay. I have put an exhibit sticker on the court reporter's, and here's the top. I stopped and that's out.
Mr. Sweeney, I would object because this is taking this information out of context. Ms. White is not expected to have the 321 page report memorized. And so to offer her an excerpt of the study and ask questions on that, it is completely out of context.
I have the entire, probably 2-inch thick document here, and she can refer to any part of it she likes.
You need a copy of that too.
She can tell us if she is not familiar with what's in the document. She doesn't recall it. She can refresh her recollection of the document. She feel there are things that need to be cleaned up. Sure.
I'm fine. I do recall it. It's 321 pages.
If I can direct your attention to page 2 of the exhibit, which is page X, I guess it's Roman numeral 8 of the report. Draws your attention to the highlighted material. It says, while Fort Worth residents are exposed to these and other pollutants released from natural gas sites, the measured and estimated air pollution levels did not reach levels that have been observed to cause adverse health effects. Further, the measured benzene, and formaldehyde levels in Fort Worth were not unusually elevated when compared to levels currently measured by TCEQ elsewhere in Texas. You see that?
Yes.
Do you recall reading that when you prepared your report?
Yes, but if you look at my report, I cited this as an explanation to understand what fugitive emissions are and a citation for that definition.
But you didn't cite it for or even reference the actual findings of the study, correct?
No.
You also cite, well, let me just put this in context. You testified and discussed in your report blowdowns, which you said are the largest source of emissions from compressor stations, correct?
Correct.
And you cite in your report, and I think this came from the 2015 ZHB report, a Trans-Canada 2005 blowdown notification. You recall that?
Yes.
Did you do any analysis to determine whether Trans-Canada's blowdown of a Canadian transmission line is at all the same as anticipated blowdowns at the Guardian compressor station?
No.
Did you review Jeremy Burden from Hyperion's testimony about the anticipated pigging operations at Guardian?
Yes.
And what did that educate you with respect to what they're going to be?
Can you restate your question?
Sure. You said you reviewed Jeremy Burden's testimony about the anticipated pigging operations at Guardian. And I'm asking you, what was your understanding from that about what those operations are going to be? What are going to be the frequency and extent of the releases at the Guardian compressor station?
I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I think Hyperion's argument is that they'll be minimal.
Do you have reason to dispute that?
Yes. The research that I know has shown that communities' reports of blowdowns,
At Hyperion compressor stations?
not necessarily.
And so are you saying that when Jeremy Burden testified that the lines would be pigged at a maximum of once every 2 to 3 months, he was lying?
I don't think he's lying.
Mr.
Are
Smith,
you-
I object. Hyperion doesn't have any compressor stations, so.
Well, he testified about the anticipated pigging operations at this one.
Well, no, I was referring to your line of questioning, asking her about other Hyperion compressor stations.
Now,
I'm gonna overrule the objection. The question's been asked and answered.
you also had indicated in your report concerns about noise from blowdowns or pigging operations, correct?
Correct.
And did you see in Mr. Burden's testimony that Hyperion will be using a vent silencer?
Yes.
How long do you understand that one of these blowdowns or pigging operations will last when it's done every 2 to 3 months?
Usually the short end's like 30 to 60 minutes, sometimes 3 to 4 hours.
Well, did you read Mr. Burden's testimony that it will only last about 15 minutes?
Yes, I read what he said.
Do you think he was lying?
I think he believes that.
You testified about all of the studies that have been done around surveys of people living near compressor stations, correct?
Correct.
And would you agree with me that in the 2015 report, EHP report that you relied on for the health effect information, that there are no studies in their survey or otherwise, specifically with respect to people living near compressor stations as contrasted with in heavy oil and gas developed areas?
Can you restate your question? I'm not sure
Sure.
I understand.
So in the 2015 EHP summary that you relied upon, would you agree with me that there are no references to studies, even if they were survey studies, done around compressor stations as contrasted with in areas of general oil and gas development?
No, I don't agree. There's a study on page 15 of that report.
And which one is that?
The information from Wilma Subra.
Well, let's look at that study. Is that the investigating links between shale gas development and health impacts in Pennsylvania? Is that the,
How much?
this is my last line of questioning. Is it the investigating links between shale gas development and health impacts? through a
no,
Community survey project in Pennsylvania?
no, I don't believe it's that one. I'm checking the citations. No, it's not. It's on bottom of page 15 of that report, citation 79. It says Wilma Subra, environmental chemist and consultant. And then on page 16, table 2.
Well, what's the reference? What's the actual article?
That's reference 79. It looks like it's a direct interview.
Okay,
Oh, no, sorry, 78.
okay, well then let's look at 78.
Results of health survey of
Yeah,
current
we
and
have that.
former.
Let's look at that quick. I'll mark this as exhibit O. You. Yeah. And I apologize, I don't have extra copies, so I can give you copies later, if that's okay. Okay. You a copy. And I'll give this to you after the witness uses it. Oh, sure. Yeah.
Hearing exhibit Q is titled health survey results, current, the former USH/Clark, Texas residents.
So if you turn with me to page 5, oh, I'm sorry, do you not
I
have a
don't have
copy?
one.
I apologize. After you mark that down, can she use your pen? You can turn to page 5. Under health survey participants, it says a total of 31 individuals from 14 households were surveyed, correct?
Correct.
And there's no indication anywhere in here other than they lived in the Dish, Texas area between, well, prior to 2009. There's no other indication of what they live near other than oil and gas development, correct?
I would have to read the study thoroughly.
Did you read it before you came here tonight or before you did your report?
I'm a little confused because the question was if there was anything in this report that I did not prepare that had studies from individual people. So like I didn't create this 2015 report, so I'm just answering based on reading you the citations. I didn't cite this study personally in my
But
report.
you relied on the 2015 summary, the EHP summary for your health effects discussion and conclusions, and they in turn relied upon this article, correct?
I relied on peer-reviewed studies, which are cited in my report.
None of which had anything to do with exposures to compressor stations, correct?
I disagree, but I don't think we're gonna agree on this, so.
Thank you.
Just a few questions.
Before she starts with the direct, when the time with this was.
Mr. Sweeney, we're gonna have to take some time with our next witness, so I don't want him or us to feel pressured in getting it done quickly, so we would prefer to have him come back in July, particularly given the voir dire I'm expecting from Hyperion.
That's fair, fair enough,
Thank you.
and we'll finish up with this one.
Thank you. Ms. White, I just want to clarify a few things. Ms. Kondo asked you whether or not you reviewed Leah Blynn's testimony, correct?
Correct.
And do you remember in Leah Blynn's testimony, where she remarked that, there were no radionuclides being reported
Correct.
in the study? And taking a look at the air modeling application, which if we go all the way back to the beginning, Hyperion's air application, do you remember seeing if there were any radionuclides listed, in the report?
No, I do not believe there are.
And based on your knowledge of all the chemicals that are used in compressor stations, are all those chemicals listed in the air modeling report?
I would object to this. Number one, this witness has not been qualified as an expert in radionuclides. And number two, her report doesn't in any way discuss radionuclides.
Ms. Kondo opened the door to Ms. Wynn's testimony and went afar from Ms. White's report. So she opened the door and I was asking Ms. White about how comprehensively she reviewed Leah Blynn's testimony.
The Miss testimony.
Yes.
Like the day when you cross-examined Miss Glenn, you brought out some of this issue.
Yes, sir.
So I'm going to sustain the objections. I think that's right.
Okay, thank you. So going back to the question I asked, is it your opinion that all of the specific chemicals that will be emitted from the compressor station, are those listed in the air modeling report from Hyperion?
No, because as I said before, it specifically says VOCs is a category, but VOC, there are many different types of VOCs.
In your professional work and the professionals that you work with, have you ever made a statement that there will not be an adverse health impact based on missing information?
No.
Help me understand how if the industry standard in preparing model or emissions report or some other type of generally refers to VOC as a category, individual breakdown.
So
Help me understand.
radionuclides weren't included. There are different types of VOCs that have different types of effects. There are, and we went over this in cross, that
Right.
some of the units, they had exempt next to it, and there are no constituents listed in this modeling. And what this is modeling. It's not actually based off of any actual data, particularly given Hyperion has never operated a compressor station.
So if that PT's position is even if the DEP regulations or the industry standard or the regulatory agency sets forth what you're supposed to report, if that labels VOC, you're saying that's not enough, there needs to be processes.
Well, it's the combination, what she's testifying to, that a limit, well, let me rephrase that a constituent, what is the public health effect of that? Not what is allowed. but what is the health impact going to be? And there are a number of constituents and pollutants missing in the air modeling report that there's no way you could render an opinion that there won't be any adverse health effects when they're not even identifying all of the chemicals and the radiation that are going to be emitted.
Is that your position as well, that there's not enough specificity in the report submitted by health committee to the
Yes, if you look at VOCs, when I talked about the health impacts, they range from like a scratchy throat to cancer. But they don't have to report benzene because it falls under VOCs, but the health impacts are drastically different.
So what's your opinion of what the emission standards are based on?
The emission standards are based on regulations. They're not necessarily,
Before they issue the regulation, they evaluate what the emission standards should be. And what are the things that they look at to set that emission standard?
I think I can help with this. Are the regulations and the work that you do you believe that the regulations are on health-based standards?
no. So if you look at the health-based if you look at a standard that the EPA suggests versus what the World Health Organization suggests, they often differ. And it's because they're coming from two different perspectives. So if you're asking me to speak to health,
Because they talk a lot about public health effects of that emission standard. That's the basis.
What reports are those? So we can.
Yeah, just look at some Federal Register reports when somebody wants to go change the rules on what the emission standards are for a particular industry. Those are based on technology and on health concerns.
well, formaldehyde, for example, a 8-hour exposure, or chronic exposure, the health limit for it is 9 micrograms per cubic feet. Right, but then if you look at the largest single HAP or formaldehyde, this is producing estimated 6.74 tons per year.
So it's apples and oranges again. It's tons per year and it's parts per million.
Correct.
Okay, one's apples and one's oranges.
What is the safe exposure limit to benzene?
0.
And does this report anywhere limit the amount of benzene that the compressor station can produce?
No.
What is the safe exposure limit of PFAS, for example?
It's not
Your
regulated.
Honor, I'm going to object to this line of questioning. There's nothing in her background or experience or spouse expertise that gives her the basis to testify as a toxicologist about limits of things that are, again, regulated in standards. And
I don't make the limits though. Those are just the limits that are created.
So the objection sustained. I think the board understands Protection's position that the submissions made by Hyperion are not specific enough. They have omissions that Protecton is concerned do not paint the full picture of the potential health impact of the compressor station.
Just a few more questions. With respect to your work in the past with the Department of Environmental Protection and your work testifying in front of the legislature, was that with respect to the need for more health-based standards in setting regulations?
Yes, it was based on explaining health research to legislators.
And in your experience, do the regulations as they stand include health-based standards in setting those limits?
No.
And what about exemptions? Are there certain chemicals that are exempt from regulation that are therefore not regulated and can be emitted at any level?
This goes back to the definition of exemption. That exemption, the definition that we talked about a long time ago with respect to exemption is whether it's exempt from getting a permit. And if the emissions are from a particular industry and they meet the industry standards for that, then you don't have to get a permit. Or if they're below a certain level, if they get above that level, then you have to go get a permit. So it's really a permitting issue with respect to the use of the word exemption. It's not, well, you know, this chemical exempt from it. It's a completely different perspective.
I would just say that we make chemicals faster than we can regulate them. So we're always playing catch up. If you're talking about PFAS, Department of Environmental Protection is working on that, but their proposed standards take like 2 to 4 years to implement.
So I want to just follow back up on exemptions. Are you aware of chemicals that are exempted from regulation under, say, for example, the Halliburton loophole?
Yeah.
Your Honor, this
Number
is,
one, this is well beyond the scope of the process. Redirect is to be responsive to what was talked about. Work for us to respond to things that we didn't deal with that may not have come up. So I think so I'm gonna.
I agree. Thank you. And we'll deal with it in our legal analysis and our findings of fact. Now, with respect to your review of the number of people that live around this area, does it sound right if I gave you back the information that you did review, that there are approximately 540 people in a 1 mile area?
Yes.
And then what about within a half a mile? Does it sound just under 50? Is that correct, that live in a half mile?
Yes.
And I think that's it. Thank you for your testimony and, you know, all of the questions. We really appreciate it.
Questions from the board?
Yeah.
540 people. So how you act, how you put together that study? I'd like to see the overview
Sure.
diagram of that and see your ratings. See how, where the streets and what communities have hours.
Yeah, we'll send that via email. It's just on our phone right now and copy of a picture of that. Yeah. Well, I'd be happy to send you a population datagram, and with, you know, pretty good detail showing all that. And then,
Because I know boat farms in excess of a mile
okay,
from the Wilson. It's in excess of.
okay.
So, and that's the largest community near Belmont. So I'm just
Yeah, sure. Now,
trouble crafting. We're talking about dwellings or workplace or what we're talking about.
we'll prepare that. Yeah, thank you.
One other question. This exhibit 27, which was a 2015 study, is there any more recent studies? Because this is 10 years old. Technology has to improve in the last 10 years. So the data that, you know, we're discussing here be old.
If I recall, Hyperion referenced the 1974 study, so I think that a 2015 study is fairly recent. And Ms. White's report refers to more recent data and literature. That's just one example of the studies that she used in her report.
Ms. Conley, you have anything else?
I do not, thank you.
Well, we need continue the that until we.
Very until the climbing. Given the lengthy proceeding.
When we get off the record, I'm gonna take care of who's coming. For a second,
Oh, a second, sorry.
all in favor? Have a pleasant year. Motion to adjourn?
Oh, motion to adjourn.